Welcome to the Stream of Sweat. This is episode number 1. I'm half of your host, Josh Smith, JJ Smooth on DraftKings. I'm joined, as always, by Ngandu Kasuku, Rainmaker on DraftKings. This is our inaugural live stream. So how about that? We'll be coming to you each and every week to talk about sports, with the focus on data, modeling, and how you can use these tools to win money in the daily fantasy and gambling markets. Today we'll be doing our weekly PGA tournament preview for the 2023 Waste Management Open. Hold on a second. See, this is the still kind of new inaugural one, but I did want to give this one for you. Oh no, it didn't work. Hold on. This is technical difficulties. Let's try this one again. Hold on. There you go, Waste Management right there. This is often called the People's Open, probably because it's the closest thing you'll get to a Happy Gilmore event on the PGA Tour. Especially, this is basically what Ngandu was like in college, just walking around in a general stupor. It is basically what the event is from my understanding. Never been, always wanted to go. But we're going to give you an overview of this tournament, what data to focus on, what players we like, which ones we don't like, for both the DFS and betting markets. And with that, Ngandu, why don't you tell us a little bit about this course?
Well, Josh, the Waste Management Phoenix Open is played every year at TPC Scottsdale in Arizona. It was built in 1986 by Jay Morris and Tom Weiskopf, with a redesign in 2014 that gave the course a little bit more bite. It's a par 71, measures in about 7260, 7261, depending on what what source you're looking at. If we're looking at past winners of this tournament, last year's winner, Scotty Scheffler, of course. The key here, as I'm sure you'll hear if you've been paying attention to any other content out there in the golf space, is ball strikers, guys that can hit the ball long and ideally in a place where they can get a second shot, because there's a lot of trouble on the course in terms of wayward shots. You're playing in the desert. And then, of course, on the back nine, I believe there's 6 holes in which water comes into play. So it's generally a place where the winner is going to be somewhere around 15, 16, 17 in terms of the winning score. So it is not an overly difficult course, but there are opportunities for blowups. So you want to make sure that you have guys that aren't just spraying the ball all over the course. Putting is generally not a huge issue there. They're very large greens. The putting isn't an issue. However, I believe I was reading Andy Lack's write-up from Rick Run Good, and he was referencing the fact, or maybe it was someone else. I forget where I read this, but they made the comment that because of the dryness of the desert, the putting tends to get more difficult as the greens dry out over the course of the weekend. I'm not sure how much that impacts strategy. It might be something to think about in terms of showdown from a DFS perspective. But that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, I wonder why. First off, water hazards in the desert. It's probably a great use of natural resources. But I did hear they don't water the last couple rounds. So it stays dry, but it's got to be super dry like all the time. So I do wonder how much that'll play. Like metrically, and we'll get into some of these players. Like everything I looked at, it mostly looked like, obviously you have to putt to win. Like players that putt well win tournaments, players that don't lose or get cut. But it looked like one of the easier putting ones. The greens are very flat, so there's not a lot of reads to them compared to the average PGA course. and it looked like once you've made the green, as you were actually on the green, um, the actual putting surface, the putts per green were quite low compared to the average PGA course. So obviously, it always comes into play, and the players that putt well will do really well. But I think it's going to, like you said, more about the ball strikers. I think it's going to be ball strikers, guys that are accurate, guys that can get on in regulation. I think that's going to be the difference maker here for most of these players.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, do you want to go into sort of the field and take a look at the tiers and see kind of where we line up in terms of the tournament?
Yeah, that'd be great. I know you kind of broke it out in tiers. I got your notes here. I don't know if you left a golfer off. Actually, I think we'd be talking about them all. Like, so just to give you guys at home a little view, and Nandu's like, put together a list of golfers you like, kind of break them up by tiers. So I came up with six guys. I'm like, these are the guys I think. And his list, I think I had a couple that you didn't have, but for the most part, you consumed my whole list and then added to it. So this is going to be an interesting one. So let's go in. We can start with tier one, and I'll just add some color with my guys where it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing that I'd like to sort of point out in terms of like how we think about this week. So obviously we want to think about ball strikers, and that's something that we want to target. But one of the things that I've also seen in terms of course history for you course history truthers out there is that typically, I think I read some statistics somewhere that said that since 2010, the last since 2010, every winner's played here at least 4 times. I heard some statistic of that nature. If you go to Data Golf, for example, they have like their rankings of each course and the extent to which course experience correlates with success. And surprisingly, TPC Scottsdale ranks fairly high. There's a lot of there's some discussion as to why that is, given the fact that it's not an overly difficult course to play. And one of the working theories, which I'm willing to buy, is the fact that it's not so much the difficulty of the course. Well, there's two things. One thing is that it is a course that it's a course that requires some thinking around the golf course. So it's not one of these things where you can just overpower the golf course. You actually have to think strategically on a variety of different holes, risk reward, some of the shorter par fours. So I think that might be one of the issues. And then the other issue is that the environment it's a pretty raucous environment. I think there's a Happy Gilmore reference, as Josh mentioned earlier. If you think about the iconic that par 3 on 16, it's a stadium hole. It literally looks like the closest thing you're going to get to like a football game or a soccer game. You've got grandstands on both sides, and if you're not someone that feeds on that as a golfer, it might be a lot of trouble for you. So definitely going to want to think about some experience, but some guys do come out here as debutantes and perform pretty well. So on the high end, you've got some decisions to. Sorry.
Before we jump into the high end, I have
You're rich, you jerk.
All right, there we go. For the high end guys.
Or as I referred to it, lifestyles of the rich and famous. So high end is kind of difficult. I personally think one strategy to approach the entire field is start at the bottom and then work your way backwards. I think there's a tendency to sort of start at the top and think about who you want to play on the high end. But I think that there's just such little separation between Rahm, Rory, Scotty, Tony, and Xander, and even Max Homa. You got JT at 9,800, so it's kind of a tough thing to think about. Of the 5 guys that are up top, I mean, Rahm and Rory are sort of self-explanatory. Rahm's also a former winner, so those 2 guys are self-explanatory. For me, I think I'm going to start with. I misspoke. Maybe Rahm didn't win here, but he's played really well here. I'm going to focus on Scotty. I think that the way that ownership's shaping up, at least as I've seen it lately, he's looking like the least owned player of the group. I don't know if that's going to hold up, but with Rahm and Rory there, and then you've got Xander at a flat 10K. I could see a lot of folks. I could see him being squeezed out of that. So I'm going to start with Scotty on the high end. I classify the top tier as 9K and up because there's Cantlay and Morikawa and JT that are in that 9K range, and I think they're every bit as capable of winning this tournament as the other guys. So my top three are Scheffler, Morikawa, and Cantlay, which will probably break my heart on Friday, or Sunday.
I had Scheffler too. I think it's a stacked field. Like, they have all the top players. Obviously, it's not like the off weeks. So there's gonna be less margin of error. Like, the players will generally play better. You're gonna have a better pool of players. So I feel like to actually win, you need to pick a chalk player and have them hit. And the price points were a little tough. You do get a little more wiggle with him over over Rahm and Rory, who were a few hundred more. But I had him. He's obviously, you mentioned a past winner. I think he was a really good course fit. Like, his approach fit was really good. When I was looking at that, I think he'll get a lot of good birdie looks. At 10,300, I think he's probably the cornerstone of my lineup. But, as I mentioned, like, I don't really pick lineups. I don't handcraft lineups. I back into them. So the way I generally approach this is a Bayesian approach. We'll do simulations first I just create every possible lineup, and then I generate simulations to determine if those lineups could actually win the tournament and what the probability is that they will win. And then I literally just randomly sample all those lineups to match that any individual player's exposure rate into winning lineups. So I just kind of randomly shotgun approach it. So given that approach, like actually handpicking players or looking at field ownership, I don't really do that. And I know that's an uncommon approach in DFS, but from a sim aspect, it just kind of sorts itself out, if you will. It'll determine what those holdings should be. And I know.
And how long does it take you to simulate all those lineups? So use that just for the people watching on television. How long does it take you to simulate? You simulate every lineup?
Yeah. So I generate every reasonable lineup. So I don't create every possible one, because you could basically get all the 6,000 guys in one lineup is technically a legal lineup. So I do put in some logic to help me determine what a reasonable lineup would, like just to basically weed out the crap ones. That'll cut down in the number you have to apply. And then basically the approach is fairly simple. It basically samples every player. So you take the projection of a single player, and when you go out and you look at like Data Golf, or you look at a Rick Run Good, like you basically have a projection, a number they give you. Here's how many fantasy points they're going to score. Well, nobody ever hits that number. That's the mean of a distribution. So you think of it as, this is the range that this player will probably score. And the number they're giving you is like that middle number, right? Here's like the average one. It's going to be a little more, a little less. So what you do is you take that range of numbers, you randomly pull one out, and it's weighted by how frequent it happens. So like that middle number would be the most high is a 50% probability, and then each number out, plus or minus, is slightly less likely. You randomly sample each player. You check that against every lineup. You determine which lineup won based from that random sample, and you do that thousands of times, like 100,000 times, or the more the better. And that's really, we ask how long it takes. It's like, well, how many lineups and how many iterations do I run? It generally takes it a few hours to process, and then from that output, I have to another process that takes a bit of time to generate the output lineups, and then I randomly sample from those. This is all something new that I've just been working on in the last few weeks. I'm going to do a session. I know we talked about maybe doing some coding ones that are less fun than just talking through the tournament and the players. I'll put some of those out on our YouTube channel just so people can kind of learn this approach and how I'm doing it. I don't play for big money or anything like that. So if there's something you learn from it, or it's helpful for you to see an approach, I'd be happy to share. And please do comment below if you have thoughts or ideas or things you'd want to see in that front. But that said, my general approach for coming up with this list that we're talking about here, why I have Scheffler, is because he came out as someone that was fairly well exposed. He had um, a high usage rate based on his salary. All the guys we talk about today are guys that came out as players I want to have a decent exposure to based on their salary. They came out as value players.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So we're moving on then. Did you already give your top tier? I'm sorry, you did?
I also had Sanjay at 9,200.
Yeah.
I think he's an ascending player. I think he's definitely he plays a ton, but he's really come on stronger. He finished fourth at the Farmers recently. He's not a big distance guy, but he has a really good course fit. I think he'll get a little bump of distance from just the high altitude of that course. I think he has a dark horse to win the tournament. Honestly, I feel like his approach and putting, he could be a decent player there.
Yeah, I think from an odds perspective, he certainly ranks higher than some of the guys that are in front of him, and he's certainly on par with guys like Homa and honestly even JT given his recent form. So yeah, I like Sanjay quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on to the next tier, almost paradise.
Great cash, homie.
We've got the 8K range here. And I mean, from the files of terribly obvious, no shit Sherlock, we start off with Cam Young, who is like, the golden child. The force is strong with this one. He can absolutely bomb it. Hits the ball well. Is a great iron player. Just a great all-around game. Made a run last year at the Open Championship, and it's just a fun guy to watch. I think, maybe there's some concern that he hasn't played a whole lot as of late. He did play last week, I believe. I don't know that he did much, but I believe he played in Europe last week. But he's definitely going to be a guy that has that kind of high upside. Projections I'm seeing have him ranked pretty low, and I don't know if that's because there's going to be so much attention paid to the guys on the high end that it's going to be hard to work him in, is my only theory, because I'm looking at I see around 11%, and that just doesn't make sense because he's generally, I think, a relatively popular player, and I would think he'd be pretty popular. He may be pretty popular in some of the more single entry stuff, particularly those single entry contests where you've got a little more, so you've got some sharper players, but he is one that I am definitely going to be playing a shit ton of. Sahith Theegala, who's kind of a wild card, tons of upside. He's one of these guys that could break your heart or make you a shit ton of money. He's coming in at 8,500, and I definitely think he's going to be overlooked, surrounded by guys like Tyrrell Hatton, who's a great iron player, and, of course, Cam Young. So he's another one. And then the other guy that I have in this 8K range that I really like is Taylor Montgomery, who I would also expect to be highly ranked or highly owned. Not looking that way now, but he's a guy that can absolutely bomb it. Not much in terms of irons, but he's one of the best putters in the field. He's one of the top 2 or 3 best putters in the field, and focusing on guys like him, guys that can bomb it and can putt, that might be a way to go, because that is that makes for a player that can do a lot of scoring and do a lot of damage on the scorecard.
Yeah, I had Young as well on my list. He finished second at the PIF Saudi over the weekend, so he's played really
there you
well.
go.
I think he's played really well for the last month, but it's been some international stuff. He just, obviously the putting's the issue, but he can straight bomb. He can hit it very accurately, very long. So I think he's a pretty good player there.
Yeah, for sure. Who else you got?
That's it from the. I only had one.
You don't have 20. You don't have 20 guys in your range like I do,
dude. I'm not just reading off the entire roster. It's let me tell you why the top 25 guys, one of them might win the tournament. I'm sure one of them probably will win the tournament. Not to bust your balls, but I'm why didn't everyone go ahead and have a shot? So
why don't I just put 30 guys in here? Okay. The next tier, 7K range, lots of players. One that you're probably going to hear some of. This is my
Fucking mope
champagne
pisses me
based on a
off.
beer budget.
We're getting in the mope tier now. So
Mope, fucking mopes, man. The mope category for you Wire fans out there. Champagne taste in a beer budget. I've got Jason Day rounding things off at 7,900. Now, I generally don't play Jason Day because this motherfucker withdraws like every other tournament, but he seems to be on the mend, seems to be playing really well. And I don't see a ton of leaks in his game at this point. He's driving the ball well. He's always had pretty good short game, and I mean, even his iron play last 36 rounds have been really good. He's coming off a 7 at the Farmer, he's 18 at Amex. Course history wise, not great, but he's played here once. Since 20 in the last 5 or 6 years. So, and he missed the cut. But he has not been a very good golfer. He has not been at his peak form for quite some time. So I'm going to ignore that. I like him. Seems to be low owned, but I've also heard a lot of folks talking him up. So who knows? I also really like Billy Horschel here. I think that he's another guy that can make some noise. Only concern I have with him is he has not played a ton, and this year thus far, I've tried to take the approach of kind of backing off a little bit off of guys that we haven't seen a whole lot of. I've had mixed results on that, but he's someone that has played really well at this tournament. Really good course history, has played really well here. And I think the environment, he's one of these guys that likes to have a little bit of fun with the crowd. He probably likes it here, so I could see him playing well. And then the last guy I have, which is a guy that's had a great season thus far, is the Hoagie man, Tom Hoagie. Great scorer, great iron player. Not great with the around the green stuff, but he's such a good approach. He has such good approach numbers that I don't think that's going to be a problem. Another thing that we try to focus, or I'm going to try to focus on at least, are guys that can, score greens in regulation, things like that. And he's towards the top of the list. The last guy I have is KH Lee, who's also played well here. And I would expect to have another good tournament here.
I think I took the only guy you didn't list is he's Keith Mitchell. I like him.
Oh yeah, Killer Keith.
I like him off the tee. I feel like he has good driving accuracy. He kind of shit the bed at the Sony Open a few weeks ago. But I think he could be competitive. I think putting is really the random piece of the game, right? So it's like when you look at skills that are sticky, things that like stick week to week. They're obviously over a sample. You can be a good putter, but a couple bad weeks putting doesn't scare me as much, and I feel like his accuracy and driving ability is going to carry him. So that's kind of where I had.
That's a good call out. I think that's a mistake that a lot of players do. A lot of DFS players will get into, is like sort of over-indexing on a particular skill. I mean, you just never know. Guys like Luke List, Luke List is one of the worst putters in the world, but he could win a golf tournament. So, you never know. So we got that. All right. So then I think we're through the sevens. My 6K and below, Dirty Deeds, done dirt cheap.
The Bulls will always lose. Do you hear me, Lebowski?
Your bums. There you go.
Do you have a job, sir? Dirty Deeds. I got Scott Stallings opening up at 6,900. I think that he's a guy that's going to be kind of nice and juicy. And he's kind of buff, so the juicy label kind of works. Kidding. I like Hayden Buckley at 6,800. Jonathan Vegas at 6,700. And then my boy, Party Marty. I mean, who doesn't play Party Marty at the Phoenix Open? I mean, come on. I think he lives out there, so I'm pretty sure he lives out there. That might even be his home course. I forget, but hasn't
a lot of them
necess-
live in. That's like a lot of off-season
in
homes.
warm areas. Yeah. He hasn't done it. He hasn't done a whole lot this season in terms of how he's played, but I'm gonna take a stab at him. Who you got?
Hoosler, around the green. I think he's really has been his strength.
Bo Hostler.
Hostler.
Yeah.
6,900. Putting is he had last 3 tournaments he'd struggled putting. Did do better at Pebble. He finished 11th, tied for 11th at Pebble. I feel like he could be pretty good. Historically, he's been a good fitter on the green, just struggling recently. So I think you could get him at a discount. And then Grillo, 6,700. Accurate play. Like the guy's just very accurate golfer. Played much better in the fall, and then has played less. I think it's a good course fit for him at $6,700. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I've got a couple of names out here. As it's right now it's Tuesday. We're getting close to this tournament, so it's kind of difficult to figure out and make out what ownership is going to look like. I'm seeing Aaron Wise ticking up quite a bit in terms of like his ownership, or at least relative to the other players in his field. Sam Burns, Corey Connors. And then I'm also hearing Ricky talked up quite a bit as well. And he's played much, much better. This is a tournament that he can, that he obviously has done well at. So I could see that. He's been taking, I believe he is taking lessons from Butch Harmon, Claude Harmon, I forget. And it's game, he's got an 11th at the Farmers, 54 at Amex. He won here back in 2019. So, folks love a redemption story. So I could see people coming back to him quite a bit. I don't know if I'm going to play him. I haven't quite made up my mind yet on him.
Yeah, I didn't really have
do you think about in your, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you think about, how does ownership factor into this sort of supercomputer approach of yours?
Yeah, the HAL approach,
the HAL, right?
It's it really I use it. I would say generate what I think ownership should be. And we talked a little bit about this kind of offline, and I'd love to have we can do a more deep conversation at some point. But the way it's really approached is more of a game theory approach. It's more of what would an ideal lineup be? Like, what is the probability of this lineup having to win? It's less trying to take advantage of the field and understanding what lineups are out there, which ones are being played, which players are being played at certain rates and maybe being played too high. If I did have a better understanding with that, I could start to include that in and probably get a better EV on my individual lineups. The idea of a players being well overplayed, there's not much advantage for me playing them. You have to be different, particularly in GPP. But the way it works right now, and we're in version 1 of this, but I have had some thoughts about how we could include basically the behavior of the other people in the contest as a way to approach it. But right now, it tries to figure out what a really good player's exposure would be and apply it. I actually took this approach from a few interviews from a person that seems to have a similar approach to DFS. He's a player named Nerdy Tenor. He's got a few interviews out there. I think I've shared a few with you. And he obviously isn't giving away what he's doing, but he's talked a little bit about his approach, and he has a Bayesian simulation model that sounds very similar to how I'm attacking the problem. So I will be interested to see, as I mentioned, this is kind of newer for me. It's just something we just started into. So I will track my lineups versus his to see how well I'm performing. I think he'll be a good benchmark for me.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, the guy had some really interesting things to say in some of the clips that I've seen. I think that one of the things that's going to be kind of fun in terms of our conversations is the different approaches. As I've said to you in the past, that you have a very dispassionate view of these contests in terms of like just trying to use and trying to leverage the model that you've built to generate a lineup that's most likely to deliver value. I think my approach is more old school, partially out of necessity. I just don't have the sort of technical knowledge. But my approach is more like the typical DFS player where, you're just sort of going through the field and trying to identify, value plays and pivot plays and trying to stay away from certain kinds of chalky plays, so to speak. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see. I think in the end, one thing that we should think about down the road is trying to figure out a way to kind of marry the two and trying to give context to some of the players that seem to pop up more than often in the model that you create. One last thing I wanted to bring up is, the field here is, I think Pat Mayo or someone use the term the winter major, because the field here certainly has the look and feel of a major, particularly now with the Live tournament and so many other players being out. So one of the things I think from a more macro level that I'm going to be trying to think about is really being more balanced in terms of the lineups that I build. And, I think there's probably too much equity up top to just entirely ignore, but I definitely want to make an effort to incorporate more of a balanced build here, because I just think there's a lot of value in that the high 9 range.
Yeah, I think like in these types of lineups, especially it's a large lineup with all the best players, which is pretty unique. So it's like an open in that aspect. So I think it will be interesting. That I've learned a lot. Like I don't have the subject matter expertise that you have just on PGA Tour and some of the pieces. I've started to include more things into my projection pieces of my lineups and trying to determine variance of any individual projection. But it's definitely a growing experience, I think, for everyone. So I'm excited to kind of grow and get better at this myself.
For sure.
I did feed some of your picks into my lineup this morning. And
Wait till you're doing Ngandu. Those are terrible picks.
Yeah, I didn't like them at all. So
stinking to high heaven.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch a little bit on the betting markets?
Yeah, I didn't pull this up. I'd love to talk through some of the ones you'd sent me. It was pretty interesting. So.
Yeah. So I do two things. I mean, I mainly try to identify. I don't really play a ton of players or bet on a ton of players that are single digits. I might play one or two guys that are in the 20 to 1 range. I think my lowest odds, Patrick Cantlay at 20 to 1. So I've got 4 players that I placed each way bets on. For those that don't know what an each way bet is, not all of the books here in the U.S. offer them, but one of my local books does. And essentially an each way bet is basically, it's almost like 2 bets in one. One is for the player to win, and then the other is for the player to place within a certain range. So for this week, I have 4 each way bets that are 1/5 and 1 to 6. So what that means is if the odds of a player are 10 to 1, then if that player places in the top 6 places, then you get 1/5 of that 10 to 1, which would be basically 2 to 1. So of the 4 each way bets that I have Cantlay at 20, Matt Fitzpatrick at 40, Keegan at 66, and then of course I took a little bit on Ricky at 70. And then I have some other bets that I made right when well, I shouldn't say when the odds came out, but I made a bet on Sunday when I noticed that there were odds up for it. Apparently the odds on DK have been up since last week, and I didn't realize this, but I bet Cam Young 45 to 1, which I think is a really good bet. Hat tip to Chris Murphy, who tipped a bunch of people off to that on Twitter. I went on there and made that bet. Taylor Montgomery at 50, Thigala at 50, K.H. Lee at 80, and Kurt Kitayama at 150, which is basically just a guy that can strike the ball well. 150 to 1. Who knows?
Well,
YOLO. Those are I try to have a couple of YOLO bets, but I feel like in this field where it's so top heavy, like, I don't know. What are the odds of a 150 to 1 golfer winning?
Yeah,
Probably not.
about
Well, 150 to 1.
Probably actually a little worse than that. And that's
Yeah,
basically
right.
what I found is, so as I've gone through, this was the first tournament I've tried to put more than a DFS model together. So I did a really simple EV model just on win probability based on that same sim that I had. And I didn't find positive EV for very many players, which is why I didn't come up with a list. I had a few guys. Scheffler showed up well. Young showed up well for overall top 5, top 10. But at least the book here in Massachusetts was just opened, which is why it wasn't really a focus for me. I'd have to drive to either Rhode Island, which is about 20 minutes for me, or I'd have to drive to New Hampshire, which is like an hour and a half. Just opened it up. I have to go into the sports book to make it. But they do have the lines online. But I just had a Cam, which line I had some positive EV for Scheffler, but it wasn't enough to make me want to drive over there and place a bet. So, which is 15 minutes, not much better than Rhode Island. So, I'm going to hold.
They'd rather have you drive. They'd rather have you drive 2 hours than they'd rather have you say, you know what, fuck this. I'm just going to keep placing a bet with my local bookie rather than driving an hour and a half or 2 hours. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I remember when this happened in Illinois, when it became legal in Illinois, they were like, hey, do you want to drive down to East? I live in Chicago. I was like, do you want to drive down to East St. Louis and place a bet at our brick and mortar casino, given these stupid ass rules you have or laws you have here in Illinois? Anyway, I digress. Keep going.
Not even a little bit. I don't want to.
No. Exactly.
So kind of getting new there. I'll have more for that on my objective side on the model side going forward. But for right now, that's kind of where I am. I didn't see, and that was actually, again, this shows you what a noob I am. I didn't see each way bets available. I wasn't aware those were until Ngandu shared them, so that was new to me, and that'll be new.
They don't offer them at a lot of casinos, and in fact, you see it more commonly overseas in Canada and across the pond than you do here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I will say my general approach in sports gambling is parlays or giving away money. I almost always do singles or props. And not that that's a parlay, but it's like if you do like horse racing and you do some of those box, like those wheels and things, like those tend to be not very profitable approaches. I'd be interested to try to calculate the EV. Not saying it's a bad strategy, but because I can't just have fun and place a bet, I actually want to think I'm going to win going into it or feel like I have some kind of edge. So I'm sure I will beat the shit out of it before I try to place that and see if I can even. So, but yeah. So if you are in the Massachusetts area and you ever want to buy me a beer for some takes down at Plain Ridge, please hook it up in the comments. Beer, even coffee with like a slice of pizza, I'll do that too. So, free tips for those. But if you lose, that's still on you, and I'm keeping the coffee and pizza. So that's how that goes. So. Is that it? Do we have anything else? Any other hot takes, Ngandu?
That's all I got. That's all I got.
You got the hottest takes out there. So.
Oh yeah.
That will do it for us today. We thank you very much. If you liked this video, if you thought, please subscribe. It really does help us, and we really appreciate it. Like the video. You can follow us on Twitter at @streamofsweat, all one word. Watch our upcoming live stream this Sunday, where we'll talk about how we were wrong on all these picks and how much better I am at Ngandu than this, even though I just started. But until next time, may all of your models finish in the 90th percentile. Thank you.
Peace.
I won't make it easy for you now. You got 2 minutes of my time.